in Montana and Hawaii, which has a lot of nuance and the things that we're learning in this moment or in real time. And Joe will talk about that later on in this presentation. But I want us to hold in our minds that this is a coordination amongst three wildly different places. So as far as what is rural, I was or a lot of my work in the beginning focused on recruitment and looking at what is rural in Hawaii. So we looked at the National Center for Education Statistics to check out, their maps and how they organize what is rural and not rural. And you can imagine that every island is has some rural representation. What I thought was interesting is that if you look at Oahu here, a rural, like the darker the green, the more rural it is, right? And then the purple and the pinks indicates more like city living. So for us, we were looking for third and fifth grade classrooms or classroom teachers. We reached out to 33 schools and on all of the islands or not all of the islands. I think it's really hard to reach out to Niihau, but 33 schools, most of the islands. And this is literally like emailing, phone call, sometimes knocking on doors just to get into the door to ask them to come join us for this project. We had we had 5 schools respond, but 4 schools really committed to this project. And what we have now is just a small group of fourth and fifth grade teachers and 4 administrators that work alongside. So in this project, it is not just teachers, but it's also administrators that are working together. And the red circles indicate these general areas of where our schools are located. So North Hawaii and North Oahu is where we had not just response, but also commitment from schools. Another part of the SAP project that we were sort of in delivering is looking at this curriculum called Pebbles or Pebbles 2. It is made up of 3 different parts, looking at place and students, looking at teacher knowledge and learning, and then also looking at instructional materials. And it asks this really great question: how can I use place and my students' interests and identities to engage students in scientific sense making? So this is focused on science or scientific sense making, student interests and identities, and place, and trying to figure out how do we get that into curriculum and then deliver it into schools that support both admin and school teachers. And the Pebbles curriculum, you can find it online, and it really is like a grassroots creation and development over a long time with really smart people and looking at how do you get place and student interests into science and scientific sense making. Is there anything? I think that's pretty much the general overview of our National Science Foundation grant. It is a 5-year, if I'm not wrong, it's a 5-year program. We're in year, I think, 2, reaching into year 3. So we're sort of just before the middle part of this. And we initially sent out surveys to look at what are teachers saying and experiencing as they are joining our program and looking for NGSS-aligned curriculum and teacher support and resources for their school and their students. All right, I see we have some things in the chat. Oh,
They're
the
from me.
curriculum,
I
and
just
then,
shared
yeah,
the curriculum.
mahalo, Joe. So feel free to ask any questions as Joe gets into some of our initial findings from our surveys and what is the story that our kumu, our teachers, are saying or are sharing as they think about this oncoming NGSS assessment. And I think our state is about to enter this viable curriculum, science curriculum. I don't want to call it accreditation, but it feels very accreditation, but looking at what is viable science curriculum for schools. All right, Joe, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you. So Stacy was talking about, the grant is, I think 4 years, but it's 2.5 years of professional development and then like a bit on each side in terms of planning and then, writing up and thinking about our findings. And so what we are presenting on is the intake surveys, some pre-interviews, and because we've only done about 25% of the PL. And Stacy also talked a little bit about like the mo'olelo of like our story in terms of how like the Pebbles curriculum, the website that I posted, you can see it's like actually hosted on a main website and that is one of our partners in the broader project. So the partners are Maine, Montana, and Hawaii. And I think we've learned a lot about like what do each of these very distinctive different areas, like what the needs are locally, like what can we learn from enacting these what are some similarities and differences across projects, and then what are some similarities and differences in terms of the adaptation and adaptation of not just material, but what the needs are for the teachers in the locales. No Minnesota. Yeah, next time. Okay, and because of this session is called Mo'olelo, we're going to rely on the teachers' words and their experiences to talk about their experiences over the first 25% of the PL. So next slide. So teachers are familiar with the concept of place-based science. Making the things you're teaching, talking about, and learning based in your place, like having the students really think about and talk about the things that they're noticing and observing in their everyday lives, and becoming more familiar with the plants and animals in our area, instead of some national curriculum that's like all about snow that they have a hard time relating to. So the question for this one was like ask about what are your experiences in place-based education, like what do you think place-based education is? So teachers are familiar with that. However, they're also familiar with the idea of teaching science through phenomenon. So teaching science through phenomenon is one of the main principles of the next generation science standards, or NGSS. And this change in terms of learning about to figuring out, like this emphasis on sense making and starting with with a phenomenon. And so teachers were asked about how confident they were in their ability to define what a phenomenon was, and they self-identified as being overall fairly confident about like their ability to identify phenomenon. Next. The way that would describe this was like you use something that the kids understand or know about, they can pose questions about. It doesn't have to be huge or anything, but something that's observable and that students can ask questions about. It drives inquiry. Why did that happen? Or how did that happen? Or what's so big about this? Next. However, they expressed frustration with their current curriculum. Our teachers are 4th and 5th grade. And so they're referencing some of the challenges specifically that they're hitting up against in these 2 grades. So with 4th grade, it's cool because our standards for social studies are state history. So we talk about Hawaii. It makes it easier to bring place in. But in science, I don't really do it. I haven't come across a curriculum that does it. Honestly, the phenomenon that mystery science uses is not connected. The kids can't relate to it. It's just more of a challenge to have to explain. And they weren't interested either because it wasn't something they could continue. So basically what we found was that existing curriculum materials, the teachers just didn't think they were a good fit. And this is an experience, I think, like people across rural areas worldwide, everyone in the Pacific is kind of experiencing. There's more and more national curriculum for the United States that's being produced, like Open Science, Mystery Science, and they're not necessarily, the teachers aren't experiencing them as good fit for local students, especially rural students. Like examples in national curriculum are just like hard to work here. So a teacher referenced snow earlier, like my daughter is in a school that uses some mystery science, and like she's bringing home science worksheets that are talking about squirrels and seasons in a way that I'm like a little bit flabbergasted that we're experiencing still. that we haven't made those types of adjustments in terms of the local curriculum. And teachers are, I just want to say about mystery science, like that a lot of teachers and schools are using mystery science because it's this comprehensive science curriculum, right? And there's a lot of appeal of this K-5 sequenced curriculum that covers all of the standards that elementary needs to cover. And the students like it, but the teachers we found were frustrated with it and don't really feel like it's serving their students. And it has phenomenon, but the teachers are finding that the phenomena just don't work here. And because of how it's packaged, it's hard for them to swap out the phenomena. But they do think that teachers should adapt curriculum to their students' interests and experiences. So they're basically like, they know sort of place-based science and phenomenon and the importance of the phenomenon, and they can like talk about what it's like to teach with phenomenon, and they think teachers should adapt curriculum to their students' interests and experiences. However, next slide, they're not as confident in their ability to adapt curriculum to make it locally relevant and or culturally important to their students. So basically, even if they know their place well, they need support making place-based connections in science. I know the area where my students come from. I know the families around that area and use those types of resources to bring people in or to contact people for help, but not necessarily as part of my lesson. It's more extracurricular type stuff. I feel like science is my weakest link. I want to be more knowledgeable and more confident, and I don't want my kids to miss out on something just because of my lack of confidence. So teachers are making connections to place and culture and community. Like they know their students, they know their areas, but they're not necessarily making those connections in science in their curriculum. So they need support to intentionally use local phenomenon and student interest to structure an NGSS storyline. And that means like this storyline, meaning this sequenced like unit that answers, that sort of ties together different standards through investigating of a phenomenon or multiple phenomenon. A bunch of my boys, they love football. So I know that if I can relate some of my content to football, then I see that they get it better. But it's not ever planned. It's not like an intentional thing that, oh yes, I'm going to incorporate this here. What makes something a phenomenon compared to something else? I would have to really understand that before I chose something. So they're familiar with phenomenon, but not necessarily utilizing local phenomenon. And they want to do this work, but there's not necessarily time to engage in it, and they don't have the framework, like the science or the standards knowledge, to work on it intentionally. So our first finding so far is that teachers are aware of gaps in their capacity and curriculum. So they have a deep and strong commitment to place and culture and are already incorporating these into their teachings, but they lack confidence in science instruction and knowledge, and they're frustrated with established curriculum, but don't feel comfortable developing their own science lessons. And so basically their lack of confidence and their science knowledge, like they don't feel comfortable developing things. And when they do teach science, they have a strong preference for using established curriculum materials based on their lack of confidence in their ability to make choices or to design their own choices. And so we've 25% into this PL journey, and teachers are really responding positively to the PL strategies. So teachers are eager to learn, to make changes to their science instruction to better connect with place and community. So the PL's already covered a lot of different topics, including things like place-based education, scientific sense-making, local phenomenon, modeling, productive talk, place-based adaptations, and teaching for equity. So the teachers are trying out strategies and reflecting on how to incorporate them into their practice, and they're making cross-disciplinary links. So linking approaches that we talk about through like a science lens and how they teach other content areas. As elementary teachers, they're teaching a number of different content areas, and so they're making these connections really without even our prompting to their teaching of other content. And we wanted to provide just an example of what this is looking like. And so teachers were asked to identify some phenomenon about weathering or erosion. And this last few months, if you don't live here, there's been a lot of weathering and erosion that has taken place with all of the kona lows. So teachers were asked to describe a phenomenon and think about what could have caused the weathering and or erosion to take place. And then how might that connect to their students' lived interests and experiences? So I'm going to provide a couple of examples for that. So the phenomenon, which is also often we like frame phenomenon as just like a statement, right? It's not necessarily a question. We want students to come up with the question. So the phenomenon could just be an image or a statement that gets students to start talking. So the phenomenon is on March 20th, 2026, many homes in Laie flooded. What could have caused that? The heavy rains and inadequate damage caused many houses to fill up with water. In the past, there were fewer houses and more floodplains. The Foodland Bridge construction project had fencing with dust screen, preventing water from flowing out to the sea. The bridge replacement project had also built a sand dam blocking drainage to the area. And so most of this teacher's students were directly or indirectly affected by the flooding. In another example, so this teacher is on the Big Island, and they described, the point that they're referencing here is on the very north of the Big Island or Hawaiʻi Island. And this is an example of weathering erosion that is not connected to the Kona lows. So this was, there used to be a lighthouse here. It was taken down in 2009 because of how close it was to the coast where the cliffs are falling into the water. So it's like where that gouge is on these cliffs is where the lighthouse used to be. So what could have caused this? Wind, weather, ocean have all contributed to the erosion of this place. You can see that the land is sliding into the water. This is a place that students go with their families for surfing and fishing. And, seeing this change of this erosion and weathering take place in these really hyper-localized areas that the students are familiar with and that are part of what they experience both in areas that are near their classroom. Next. These are some of the other examples that teachers brought in. So they would bring in examples from, one of these is just from a place that they walked their dog that they noticed a lot of erosion and weathering in. And some of these are sort of more larger scale, more dramatic changes. And so just highlighting this as the examples don't have to be phenomenal to be a phenomenon. So a phenomenon does not have to be phenomenal. It can be, but it can also be like something that you are noticing every day, like on your walk around the campus, that you're like, wow, this is like, there's more dirt in this area than there normally is. Teachers are already doing the work, right? Teachers are familiar with their students. They're familiar with the students, their communities that they've worked in. And some of the teachers have worked in these communities for quite a while. They're connecting with their students and evaluating to make sure their curriculum to make sure it meets the standards that they need to target. And even you can see that in the use of mystery science. Like they're using mystery science because it is an accessible curriculum that hits the standards that their students need to target. So even if it's not meeting all of their needs, they're like thinking about the students when they're making those choices. But the work of the PL is to help teachers connect their place to students, to see the NGSS, the standards in their place, and to support them in designing intentionally science learning experiences that engage their students. And so we want teachers to see themselves as designers and through the lens of place first and letting that place shape the unit and the curriculum that they're doing, as opposed to either using existing curriculum or making those like, I'm going to call them like simpler surface level swaps where you're just like swapping out like a pollinator or something seasonal and rather letting the place speak to how the unit is developed. So our next steps, we have a lot of them, but thinking ahead to what things look like over the next 2 years is to focus on ʻāina-based PL that scaffolds teachers in designing their own place-based science learning experiences built around local phenomenon. And so these learning experiences will engage students in scientific sense-making, modeling, and evidence-based explanations. We want to center ʻāina and mo'olelo, and so lessons don't just swap stuff in, but framed around the school's ahupuaʻa, and the schools and land around the schools, mo'olelo, as the baseline text of what the unit is. We also want to elevate kilo as the core practice. Instead of just checking off like NGSS science and engineering practices, we'd like teachers to anchor and support them in anchoring the entire inquiry process in Kilo, which is the highly sophisticated Kanaka Oiwi practice of deep long-term environmental observation. And so the students often are part of these like elementary schools for a number of years, as are the teachers, and they know their place, right? And so we want to empower them to see their understanding of the place in terms of the school and the area just around the school as the baseline for these really sophisticated kilo practices. And with that, that's sort of the end of our formal presentation. And so we'd love to hear some of your mo'olelo, like what are your empowering stories of place and education, science phenomenon in ʻāina, and community in transforming schooling. We're also happy to take your questions, but we want to really hear from you. We have 2 years of working ahead with this project and curriculum. And so what can we learn from you? How can we support other good work in the area? And yeah, Stacy, anything else to jump off the discussion points?
Yeah, just as you're thinking about, your story and or your question, I just want to share that and re-emphasize what Joe is saying, as we transition and make choices, as we're thinking on different levels of coordinating with 3 different sites from 3 drastically different places and 3 different even styles of leadership and decision-making structures, and also figuring out what is really important for our teachers in Hawaii and those students and those communities. And so as you're forming questions, just there is a lot of nuance in the coordination of this project but the ultimate intention here is making NGSS and science more accessible and equitable for teachers as well as their students and their communities. And that takes a lot of time, and I'm really appreciative to work with Joe and Kirsten because their work has spanned very deep, intimate connections with our schools and our teachers. So yeah, as I'm learning from them, it's really neat and nice to do this work with science education in rural communities.
I also just, so our fearless leader, Kirsten, is not here today because she is attending a workshop on the windward side of Oahu because of the initiative that Stacy mentioned about having the choice of science curriculum in classrooms. Like, so the curriculum in, math and English is more prescribed, but for science, it hasn't been for a really long time as much, right? There's guidelines and whatnot, but now it'll be basically approved, for lack of a overly simplistic, approved. And like the intentions behind that, and I work with the science coordinator of the DOE as well. And it's because some teachers are doing this really high quality work and some schools are not. And my little 7-year-old making her way through the public school system here has not experienced like the high quality science education that I would have hoped for so far. And so I can see both sides, right? I want to empower everyone to do amazing things. And, there is like a floor that you want to make sure like there's no pukas in. So the work that Kirsten is doing today it's being supported by folks who are concerned about what that could look like, because there's unintended effects to all of these decisions, even if they are not entered into from like no one intends to do bad things, right? So they're like just sort of thinking about what those unintended effects could look like and working towards curriculum that could be developed in a way that is very intentional, that meets NGSS and would pass the review of whatever it's going to look like in the DOE. And like, what is that process? What does that look like? And how can our work sort of support and leverage and you know, join with these others that are doing similar work across the Paiana.
And with that, are there any stories or questions that you folks have?
I have a question about the kilo. I was wondering because I actually teach at Kamehameha, so we actually have the students anchored to a place that is important to them. And then they're sharing like the mo'olelo of that place, looking at analyzing mele, oli, mo'olelo of the place, knowing the wind and the rains, looking at ʻāina-based. And so we always try to have them kilo. So I'm always looking for ways to also elevate their kilo because a lot of times they come out flat. So I was just wondering, I guess if you could share a little bit more in depth of your guys' thought for the kilo portion of this project.
Hello, can I ask you a question? What grade or general is it elementary, middle, high school
Yeah,
that you
so I
teach?
teach sixth grade, but it's still considered elementary at our school. And at our school, science is actually a separate, we have specific science teachers from K through six. But in sixth grade, we do a lot of project-based learning, place-based learning. So we try to incorporate a lot of science into our social studies unit. So the project that I'm talking about is actually our social studies unit, but we do incorporate kilo. So I'm always just looking for new ideas, resources on how to help students elevate their kilo as well.
Good. Good question.
Hey, so I think, well, there's never going to be one answer to that question, unfortunately, right? Like we all want the one. We haven't, I think what we're hoping to do is work with the teachers to design things that align with whatever they're hoping to kilo with their students, right? So like we have a teacher who's super into gardening, and I'm assuming Stacy just smiled because we're thinking, like this teacher, it's every time we talk, there's so much talk about gardening. So it's such a green thumb. And so like whatever they're going to develop, I'm certain will relate to gardening, right? And the way that you might kilo in that type of environment with whatever she's developing. Like I'm not sure. I don't foresee the teachers developing the same type of activity across. I don't know how much collaboration is going to take place, and even if the underlying concept and focus is the same in terms of kilo, I think the kilo will look really different across the different grades and across the different sites. And I think that's actually one of the things we're really interested in. Like, how do we elevate this and have it be a focus of the PL and attend to rigor, right? And other things and elevating the students and the teachers' practices and not try to make it too prescriptive. I think those are the types of things that we're interested in looking at across our teachers and sites. Stay
Yeah, and
tuned.
I think for me, the practice of kilo, it's there are some pretty not, I don't want to say basic, but like some underlying parts of that practice that I've heard from that people have expressed as many folks that I've interacted with have their own personal practice of kilo. And what I hear commonly is that it's consistent and either the same time of day and they're observing something specific, like it could be moon, it could be a certain plant, it could be a certain tree, waves, it could be the crystallization of moisture in the clouds and how light refracts in between and through. So like people, I always see there's consistency and there's always a purpose. There's always, whether it's for navigation purposes or figuring out weather purposes or figuring out gardening, but like farming and like management of water, management of land. So the kilo, like Joe says, it really depends on what their goals are for what their experience in their classroom is. And so like science is a general content, but what you're using the science for, I think guides your kilo. It guides, it's Hawaiians are practical people. And so we don't do anything just because we do things because there's a purpose here. There's always some underlying project or goal or big idea that's 7 generations down the line that we want to happen for them. But yeah, I've been in conversations where somebody said, "Oh, did you notice that the sky was this certain shade of pink or red that transitioned to this?" That tells us that it's going to rain in whatever amount of time, and that the crystallization of moisture tells us that blah 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 blah, right? And we get really like in the clouds, like literally in the clouds about things. But that takes so much time and consistency and observation that it really is specific to that person or the group that person is part of. And so what is your purpose as your hui in your 6th grade? Like what is their purpose or your purpose for them? And how does that guide your kilo? Sorry, I know this is not like specific strategy, but it just really basic things like consistency and yeah, expression.
No, yeah, mahalo. I'm just always interested in learning from others. Like, how do you guys do it? We've tried different things, different years. So, yeah.
I just want to encourage you to keep trying. I mean, there's not really a wrong way. I'm interested in knowing what you mean by flat. What does it mean that their responses are flat?
Um, I guess it's, yeah. So that's why I guess for us as Kumu, we're trying to develop clarity in what are our expectations, what is our purpose. But I think like how I see it aligned with you guys are like they need to engage in Kilo to really understand the Aina, what is happening. And so, and then as part of Mo'olelo, a lot of the like we go through a whole lot of Mo'olelo and a lot of the Inoa Aina of the places that they live in, they don't like we don't use them anymore. We use newer names like Hawaii Kai, Pearl Harbor,
Mhm,
Sand Island, but we're trying to turn them back to what is the Inoa Aina of this place? Why is that? And so really the only way that they can find that a lot of the Inoa Aina only live in our Mo'olelo or in our Mele or in our Oli, and trying to get the kids to connect to it and understand why we should be using the ʻāina. So it's just like, okay, if the name of the rain is this, what are the characteristics of the rain? Or what is the characteristics of the wind? Why did our kupuna name it that?
mhm.
So yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and it's also about relationships too, right? Like how the rain and the wind and light are all in relation to each other and how they create that rainbow. Like in Manoa, we have Kahala Opuna, whose parents are Kahaukani and Uatuahine, and those names of the rain and the wind. It shows a relationship between these three, I'm gonna call them three phenomena, but it's all about the relationship. And so sometimes I just get excited. Also, your excitement for these phenomena kind of fuel that excitement for them and how you express what you kilo, and they might just want to kilo along with you.
Mahalo.
Any other stories or questions? Like, how do you folks? Yeah.
Sorry. I have some thoughts. I just want to say thank you, like to the both of you for sharing this. I'm so sorry I interrupted you. It's always like that awkward, like, do I unmute myself? Do I like keep myself muted? But I live in California. I'm a current STEMS² candidate. So I'm here now. But in California, it's, I think, harder to do some of these things because, like, while your studies and research are focusing on like rural areas, it's harder at least for me, I'm a ninth grade biology teacher, to think about how these phenomena are centered within like a more urban space. And I think something that I've learned to help with phenomena, and something that I've learned from my science methodology professor at UC Irvine is asking students what they know about where they live, what they know about their environments or local environments, and most importantly, what matters the most to them when it comes to learning about what they know already, and kind of like engaging them in that deeper inquiry of like, like, why does this matter to me? Why does the fact that fires can start so close to my home, how can that affect like what I'm learning in class or like what I'm learning in school? And so I like to ask them those questions before thinking about what phenomena to choose when it comes to specific units, because like I serve them at the end of the day. Like, yes, I want to teach them what's interesting to me, but like I want to make sure that their experiences are reflected in what they want to learn about where they live. So just a thought, and I think this whole thing is super cool, and it definitely helped me take what I've learned from the two of you and your research like back home when I start this next school year. So thank you again, and I hope that my thought resonated with some of you.
I really appreciate what you just said. And I think that this idea of the teachers choosing the phenomenon, I think it's an oversimplification of like that classroom kind of has to choose it, right? And then as a teacher, you have these guidelines and these guideposts, but you don't necessarily know where sometimes, like you kind of know where you're going to end up, hopefully sometimes. First time I never do, but like sometimes you end up in a different place. But there's definitely been instances where I'm like, this is going to really, I really think this is going to like jive with my students. Like, I think this is going to be really meaningful to them. And it just kind of falls flat, right? It just like what can work in one classroom might not work in the next. And what can work one time might not work the next. Like, our students are amazing and keep changing, and like pop culture, like keeps changing. And like my ability to relate to them keeps changing. And that it's also okay to change it, right? Like you can try something that you think is going to work, and like you have to just treat all of these as like little action projects, and also give your students choice, right? You can always give them a choice. Like these like the phenomenon, there's not like one way to teach a concept with any one phenomenon, right? And so if something isn't working, you can just switch it to something else, which is so much easier to say than do. Like I know that is like very flippant, but the great thing about them is that they are there's not just one choice. There's not just one right way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and also just phenomena is really hard. Choosing a phenomena is so hard because you have to be so intentional about it, like, like you have explained so well, and so relevant to them. Because, yeah, like when your students are learning something that has nothing to do with where they live, like in the context of where they're living, like it's harder for them to see themselves in science. And I think like it's harder for them to form identities within science. And because I always tell my kids, like, science is everywhere, guys. Like, it might not seem like it, but it is. And teaching them how to make relationships with themselves to the things that they see in the world is it's like really hard to do, and definitely a process that can change, like you said, and there's never one right way to do it. So yeah, I agree. I agree with
I also think like, when you think about phenomena, like not each one has to hold a whole unit, right? You can have these smaller explorations that just have to like guide not have to, but would be lovely if they could guide learning on a smaller scale. So embedding them larger. So thinking small, right, always is a great place to start. I also, even though this is like a place-based focused conference and session, I think it's okay to mix things up too. Like not every single one has to be from your backyard, right? Like I'm just thinking again, like, my child, right? There's nothing that can hold the attention like 6 and 7-year-olds like the Titanic. It has nothing to do with their lived experience at all. And it's okay if like they are exposed to things that are not necessarily in their backyard, but we want to prioritize the things in their backyard, right? And we want them, that's like the goal, that they understand their place really well. And it doesn't have to be every single lesson and all the time. Like that's also okay.
Yeah, thank you. I also agree with that. Thank you. Mahalo for sharing. I don't feel as insane seeing all these other kumu also go through the frustration and the struggle and the trial of merging the place-based learning mo'olelo ʻike kupuna and aligning it to NGSS. So this was really reassuring. It makes me feel less crazy, so mahalo. Also the mystery science. I've been trying to navigate that and using the framework of NGSS, but then also shifting it to ʻike Hawaiʻi, and the bare minimum sometimes is just switching out the English to ʻōlelo Hawaiʻi, and then other ways of adapting it to Hawaiʻi. But I also had a question. I'm super interested in your partners in Maine and Montana and how you're how Pebbles is being utilized on the continent and place-based learning being utilized on the continent. And so I'm curious if you have any insight on how like Indigenous communities and educators are incorporating Pebbles curriculum into their school, or if their mo'olelo and their place-based learning curriculum of their own is being, if they're in collaboration with other educators in Maine and Montana. But yeah, I'm interested if you have any insight on their
We
other mo'olelo.
we are gaining insight constantly on what it is like to work with partners across the continent. And I think in like the best ways, we're learning like about, so first of all of the partners do have Indigenous partners, I believe. And the Montana one is particularly attends the most cross project meetings, I guess. And then, but I think the way that my brain is jumping around because you asked a lot of things, but to speak about the Pebbles specifically, the original intention for the grant was that everyone do this first unit of Pebbles as written as a baseline to sort of develop their own, right? Because as you're thinking about like developing your own comprehensive unit, like that is so overwhelming, right? And what does a high quality comprehensive unit look like? And many of you are deep in that space and do this work all the time and can recognize it, right? And some people, they just haven't even experienced like this type of high quality comprehensive curriculum. And because that includes like, how do you differentiate? What does assessment look like? Like all of these, like it's not just like the lesson, right? It's like the package. And so we found out when our PL started that was not going to work here. That because of the phenomenon that Pebbles used, it wasn't just like, oh, we can swap something out here. Like I think the second lesson was put a bag of water in like a cup of cement or something like that and put it in the freezer. And like we're going to learn about weathering. And it was like, oh, well, that's not how weathering happens here. Weathering happens here, but it's biotic, right? It's through tree roots. It's through wind, it's through waves, and the move, like, so the actual breaking down is is a little bit different than typically on the mainland in terms of the colder climates. Montana and Maine, apparently pretty cold. Uh, and so these things about like these big rocks moving and how they're moving and the examples that the Pebbles unit started off with, like they're fascinating, and they also just didn't land with the teachers, right? The teachers are like, well, we signed up for this curriculum. We signed up for this project because we're ready for step 2. We don't need to start at step 1. Like we're ready for step 2. Like this is almost going backwards to have to engage in this. And that was like feedback that we took to our partners. And so I think Hawaii has done overall more work in this space in general as a very simplistic overview than some of these other spaces. Not necessarily the specific people that we're working with, but the overall, where maybe I would say like the state is in terms of thinking about incorporating Indigenous knowledge and place-based doing and thinking and stuff. And so rather, like, we are not doing Pebbles here, even though that's what the program was based off of. Stacy, I'm sure you have things to add.
We're critical of Pebbles and looking at what is the structure and the way they set it up that really does work in this place for Hawaii, and what that might work with these communities that we're working with, or these teachers and their communities. So it's not about just scrapping any old thing, but really looking at what is the value of the things in this curriculum. One of them being this idea of storyline. And this idea, so we're in a mo'olelo room, right? So they're like, what is the story that your curriculum is telling? And for them to center storyline and storiness, like storying, that it really made sense. That part of it made sense for Hawaii, because we're really great at telling a bunch of stories. Not that they all make sense, but like stories are happening. But to look at curriculum as a storyline, what is the story your curriculum is telling? And that makes sense to us. So we're taking inspiration in those forms and trying to adapt them, and looking at what are the other resources that are digital, virtual, online, and physical, and even like what are the resources of recent decades that so many nonprofits and so many education groups have already created, and how do we take those, meld those, update them so that a 2020s version of these things geared towards NGSS, geared towards ʻāina, it's everything into one, but the simplicity of story and storyline, it really makes sense for us in Hawaii to put them in a story.
I will also like say, I think like that structure of Pebbles, and it's like very similar to Open Syed. And I actually like really like Open Syed. I think the research that it's based on and the people that are involved in Open Syed are like they're the top science researchers in the nation are working on that curriculum. And it still doesn't necessarily work everywhere, right? But the research behind it and the stories and the phenomenon and it's not like you want to keep those really good high quality concepts, right? About like how do we learn science? Like we know so much more about how we learn science. And I use science like as an oversimplification too. Like how do we learn about the world? Right? Like science, but how do we learn about the world? We just know so much more about how students and adults and people learn about the world and how the world works. And it's taking that information about like from cognitive science, from brain-based science, and applying that information to what we're doing locally. And also drawing from these extremely well-funded, well-resourced projects. Like, I mean, here, like, we have great teachers, and Stacy, Kirsten, and I are like amazing, clearly. I mean that as a joke for those that don't know me, but like we don't have the capacity of like Open Syed, right? And so it is, what does that look like at a local level? Because the capacity for those types of projects can only take place at these huge national scales. And then what does that look like with the capacity that we have, right? And that is just going to be at the products and the outcomes will be different and more hopefully meaningful to the teachers, right? But also not necessarily, we're not pushing this back up to the national level necessarily. We'll take the lessons learned, but not necessarily the curriculum up.
Mahalo. Mahalo, Joe.
Mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo, everyone.
I feel like we've gone way over, Jamie. You haven't cut us off. Like,
Yeah,
what is the next
thank
step?
you. I have to say thank you so much. If you loved us, our name is Joe and Stacy Prellberg. And if you didn't like us, our name is Alapaki and Stacy Potez. So, mahalo.